when I'm teaching, when I'm speaking to the general public, I have to really emphasize that, particularly where I was when I was speaking in Japan. They thought that I'd been shipped in by the American government or the Japanese government or TEPCO, the electricity company, or the nuclear people, and I said, no, I've come here uninvited of my own free will. Because I think this is an important subject which I've stumbled into. I think in the minds of the general public, they confuse two completely different things with nuclear, when people say nuclear safety, and one is the problem of controlling reactor stability and controlling the energy production, and that, of course, is a major engineering problem. And then there's a quite separate item, which is the effect of radiation on human life. And I think much of the trouble has come from confusing those two, probably not in the minds of many people here, but in the minds of the general public. So the record shows that when things go wrong, nuclear reactors, because of course they have something like 3 years worth of fuel on board at any one time, when things go wrong, they very easily destroy themselves. But the interesting thing to note is that almost nobody, and we'll look at it a bit more carefully, almost nobody dies, whereas they're dying in droves in the Chinese coal mines every day. I'm not going to apologize. My lecture is going to be rather simple, because we have to get across to the general public in simple terms the whole business of what radiation is and why it isn't dangerous and so on. And that's got to be done in simple terms. There are lots of people running around saying how complicated it is. Well, A, I disagree with them, and B, that certainly won't work for bringing the public on side. And when we look at new nuclear, it's very easy to be swept aside by looking at the technology and so on, while ignoring what one might call the elephant in the room. I don't like these sort of phrases, but it's particularly apt in this case. The whole business of the fact that people are frightened of nuclear radiation, and unless we address that, nuclear power is not going to be acceptable. So just to add a little to how I got here, as I say, I've been told that I drifted sideways from the medical physics course, which involved MRI and radiation imaging and radiotherapy and all sorts of other things. And I wrote that book in 2006, and it's an advanced final year undergraduate textbook. But by the end of that, I was really exercised by the complete disconnect between the levels of radiation which are considered dangerous in the environment and what is used to very good effect in many people's lives in clinical medicine. And everybody knows this. They go to their doctor, they have scans and therapy and so on, and the public needs to understand the relationship between these two. So my book, Radiation and Reason, I wrote it with an Australian journalist breathing down my neck who wouldn't allow me to put any equations in the book at all. So the whole thing has got to be in very simple terms, and my wife and a number of my students read it as well, but then I couldn't get anybody to publish it. So I published it myself, which means using students, my own students even more, to go through it and criticize it and so on. And luckily, one of those students lives in Tokyo with his wife and family, and of which more later. Since Fukushima, there has been interest in publishing it, and it's now been published in Japanese, which you can all see there on the right. So, looked at from a public point of view, safety, the way we were all brought up, at least I was brought up, that fire was dangerous, and this is the 19th century cautionary tale, Harriet and the Matches, about fire. But we all know, in fact, that's wrong, because the real danger about fire is not just the local combustion, which also can be dangerous, but the effect on the planet as a whole, and that is a very serious matter, and why we've got to replace fossil fuels. Of course, it's easy to make a list of what a replacement source of power to replace fossil fuels has got to do, and if you make such a list, it's quite simple to go down and put a tick against almost every box for the benefit of nuclear, and I won't go through all these, but it's only when you get to the bottom, the health impact and the public acceptability of that, that you come to you come really into difficulties. All the other things can be done, and that is not really what I want to talk about today. So the question is, why are people frightened of radiation? Should they be frightened of radiation? I think they're frightened of radiation for three reasons. One was because they first learned about all this sort of thing in the context of nuclear weapons and the threat of a nuclear holocaust at the time of the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis and so on. And those who are young enough not to have lived through that, I can tell you it was very alarming indeed. And we all were not sure whether we were going to wake up the following morning. And all that happened on the public without them actually knowing very much about what it was all about. The second problem is that people say, you can't feel radiation. Of course, if you go into a room and it's dark, you can't see the things in there and you stumble over them. So what do? You turn the light on, or you get a torch out so that you can see things. So we know our normal way of dealing with things that we can't sense directly is to use instruments and light and so on to see things. And of course, it's not difficult to sense nuclear radiation with an instrument, and most people do not realize and need to be told. If you're telling somebody, of course, a smoke alarm is a radiation detector, and it's there to detect smoke, but in fact, the guts of it is detecting radiation, and in fact, it's got an americium radioactive source in it as well, for good measure, and everybody's quite happy with that, but it's about time they realize what goes on inside a smoke alarm, and suitably modified for a very small amount of money, if mass produced, we could have radiation detectors in the home wherever they're needed, which would then, I mean, just like a smoke alarm, when a smoke alarm goes off, it doesn't mean say you've got a fire. Usually it means that somebody's burnt the toast. But then you do something about it. And I think we've got to start taking the same kind of attitude to radiation. But there's a much more serious side to feeling nuclear radiation, and that is that the cells of the body can detect radiation. And not only do the cells detect radiation, but they're able to repair the damage that the radiation does. I'm not going to go into all the details because there are several overlapping mechanisms, some of which involve repairing the cell and its DNA, some of it involve scrapping the whole cell and replacing the cell, and so on and so forth. But the cells do detect the radiation. The only thing is they don't tell head office, and so head office doesn't know, rather like the Home Secretary, doesn't know what's going on. So I think people need to be reassured that this has been, the detection of radiation and doing something about it has been very satisfactorily devolved to the cellular level. And I will be showing you some evidence of how we can persuade members of the general public that that actually happens. And then finally, perhaps, the fact that the regulations, the laws, and the working process, and the radiation protection regulations tell you that certain levels are dangerous. And I'm going to argue very forcibly that they do that because they've asked the wrong question, and so they've got the wrong answer. Well, there came a point just after there'd been a change of government there was a new prime minister in Japan, where it looked as if one might be able to go there and say some sensible things. And so I joined with another couple of people, one of whom was a nuclear and mechanical engineer from Idaho, and the other of whom was a PR man, an American living in Tokyo. The other chap was a Japanese living in Idaho. And we decided to go. And the PR man organized lots of things. And a few weeks before that, I'd in fact been privileged to teach some students, high school students from the devastated area at an exchange workshop for several days about radiation in Cambridge. And so I had relationships, I had contacts with schoolmasters and so on in the region, and that proved extremely useful. So when the doctor bundled us all into an ambulance, and we drove straight into the evacuation zone through the roadblocks. And here, this photograph is taken 3 kilometers away from the nuclear power plant, whose cranes and things you can see there on the horizon, and you can see the all too familiar detritus of the tsunami in the foreground. I have to say that the dominant effect that one got of going there is to observe that the earthquake had done rather little damage. There were a few garden walls and garden sheds that had fallen over. We saw one school which had suffered structural damage, but it had already been replaced. The train, the bullet train, which was swept away with and the track and everything by the tsunami, has already been completely replaced. And by the time we were there, at the end of September, the train schedules and so on were all back to normal. So the earthquake is something that they've learnt to live with. The tsunami, of course, was devastating in the coastal region, and some 15 to 20,000 people died. And it's interesting, they don't really talk about that very much. I think there's some sort of mental block there. What they prefer to talk about is the radiation, because they think they can do something about it, whereas nobody has died from the radiation, and I hope I will show you some numbers which suggest that nobody is going to, even in the next 50 years. But the dominant effect affecting hundreds of thousands of people is the abandoned fields, the shut-up houses, the shuttered shops and small businesses, and one can only imagine, and well, we were talking to the doctors and the local community leaders about their problems of trying to keep the communities together, the rising suicide rates, the family problems, the old people who've been shifted out, and of course you move old people at your peril, or rather at their peril, because they don't come back. They're not easily moved, and it's too traumatic So there already have been many, many deaths from the effects of the measures that have been taken. Here we are in the hospital discussing with the doctor and his assistant on the left, and myself and Professor Tohihiro from Idaho discussing these things in the hospital. The doctor took us to a very nice Japanese meal, but unfortunately we didn't get round to taking any photographs till we'd eaten all the food. So it all looked much better than that to begin with. And there we are meeting the mayor of Minami Soma. Minami means south, South Soma, and discussing things with him too. And then we went to Tokyo and gave press conferences to not just to the local, but the international media as well. And some of them swallowed it and some of them didn't. The Japan Times, for instance, gives a very good article in English. The Telegraph's man wrote a nice thing, but the office back in London rejected it. So it's very difficult to get across to people, even if you can communicate with them that was the chap on the right there was from the Financial Times who was chairing the meeting. Here's me giving my lecture and talking about the same slides you've already seen. Then we spoke to the Japanese press, and that was important to get our case across to them. So, end of my holiday snaps. Let's get down to the serious question. There's only one serious question, and that is, what is the effect of radiation on life? If, in fact, radiation is safe, relatively safe, or rather, insofar as it is safe, we don't have to worry about safety regulations and working practices and wastes and costs and so on, because they've all been over-egged. So the big question is, as I say, is radiation, what is the effect of radiation on life? And that, of course, as always, scientifically means two things. One is understanding the biology and so on in principle about what's going on, and also having large-scale data which shows that we've got the answer right, and that you can show to the general public and say, look, this is what happens, you know about this and blah, and actually to sell the results. And then, of course, there are the international consequences of fear of radiation to terrorists and rogue states and Iran and dirty bomb threats and all the rest of it. Well, whether that's serious or not all depends on whether radiation is dangerous or not. And obviously, at some level, it is. So the question is, what is the level? So when radiation hits live tissue, it's not a physics system. The result is, in fact, depends not only on the dose, but also on the period over which the dose happens. Because as we will see, as I've already said, biological systems have evolved to repair the damage. And the question is, do they get enough time to repair the damage? And so it's rather like, for instance, if you take 100 paracetamol tablets all at once, you better book your taxi to the hospital before you do so, because you'll need some very rapid attention. On the other hand, if you have 100 paracetamol tablets over a period of a few months, you will have cured a number of headaches. Equally, if you spread them out over 50 people, even if they take them all at once, you may have cured a few headaches. So it's all a question of the period and the intensity, if you like it, of which the radiation dose is spread. Now, particularly with the Japanese, to say the Japanese don't trust anybody. The biggest damage that's been done there is the loss of public trust. But I'm not going to give a sociological story about that, but there is such a story to tell. How can you build public trust in radiation? And it seems to me the only thing you can do is to build on clinical medicine. Everybody knows people who have had radiation doses for medical purposes, and if they've had a cancerous tumor, they may even have had radiotherapy. And we all know such people, and that gives us something to build on. Now, a CT scan gives something like 5 to 10 millisieverts, quite a lot more than an old-fashioned chest X-ray or a dental X-ray, basically because the amount of information, the information density in the image is very, very much higher. You've got three-dimensional information, and you need a lot of flux of radiation to take that data. But a CT scan, of course, uses an external source of X-rays, which are shone into the patient, whereas a PET, positron emission tomography, or SPECT, single photon electron emission computed tomography scan, is done with a dose of radioactive material which is injected into the bloodstream, and it doesn't really make very much difference to the dose that you get, whether it's internal or external. This worries people that external and internal are very different. But the internal and external, essentially the same types of radiation, internal and external, as people are getting from Fukushima. Of course, the balance of how much was internal and how much was external was rather different at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where it's mainly external, whereas at Fukushima it's mainly a question of internal and radioactivity that is absorbed. But it's not really that's not really a big deal, but it excites a lot of concern. Here is a Japanese advertisement, which you don't understand and I don't understand either, for a PET CT scan, and people are that's 94,500 yen. They're being charged nearly £1,000 for this treatment, and they queue up to do it. Whereas, as we will see, up the other end of Japan, because this was down the south, up the other end of Japan, people are being thrown out of their homes for the same kind of dose spread over a year, which, of course, is absurd. Here you will see it says FDG, that's fluorodeoxyglucose. What is injected is a radioactive fluorine loaded into a glucose molecule. All the rest of the stuff I don't understand. So, what actually is going on, for instance, with food regulations at Fukushima? Well, on the 27th of July, actually, well, I picked this up on the day before I was talking to these students in Cambridge. And they say that the maximum radioactivity in the meat is acceptable is 500 becquerels per kilogram. Well, I sat down and worked out, starting from electron volts and all the rest of it, what I thought eating 1 kilogram of meat of that activity should give by way of a dose. Now, cesium is excreted from the body in a natural way over a period of about 100 days, 4 months. So you don't have to wait 30 years. It gets washed out. And I calculated what that 1 kilogram of 500 becquerels per kilogram meat, what dose that should give you, and I was very surprised to find out that I came out with exactly the same number that was quoted by the Japanese government in their regulations. Well, 500 becquerels per kilogram and 0.008 millisieverts, 15 millisieverts for a CT scan and 0.008 millisieverts per kilogram of meat eaten. It's not a difficult division to work out how many kilograms of meat you would have to eat to get the same dose as you get from a CT scan. And the answer is 2,000 kilograms. So eating 2,000 kilograms of contaminated meat in 4 months is unreasonable and extremely unhealthy or inconceivable from many other points of view. So I was showing this to people in Japan. Look, the regulations are all wrong and unreasonable. The trouble is that this error was already found at the time of Chernobyl, for the same reason. I've got some data here from Norway, as reported at a meeting in Washington in 1998 by people from the Norwegian Radiation Protection Authority, and they raised their prescription on meat from 600 becquerels per kilogram to 6,000 becquerels per kilogram. And by doing this, they were able to maintain the reindeer breeding industry and prevent everybody going bust, whilst having no effect on public health whatsoever. But they haven't done that at Fukushima. In Sweden, in 2002, the Swedish Radiation Protection Authority published an open letter in the Swedish daily press, that's on the 16th anniversary of Chernobyl, at which they admitted that they condemned a large amount of meat unnecessarily. 78% of all reindeer meat was destroyed at immense damage to the cost to the taxpayer and temporary adversity to the reindeer herders. And then they said, the thinking behind the intervention level was that individual risk would be so low that the consumer wouldn't need to think about what he or she bought in the shops. Perhaps we took, that's my red line, perhaps we took too great a responsibility for the individual consumer, they said. It's not reasonable dealing with people by telling them that we've set the thing so low that you don't have to worry about it. People are going to worry anyway. So it's much better to tell them the truth, and then they can apply their caution on top of that in the normal way, and parents can worry a little bit more about their children and so on. But what's been happening both after Chernobyl and after Fukushima is that the extra caution has been double counted, and the fear has fed on itself and made the situation even worse. The case of Sweden is particularly important because Lars-Erik Holm is not only the Director General of the Swedish Radiation Protection Authority, but he's also the chairman of the Director General of the International Commission on Radiological Protection. They don't understand how to inform the public in a way that the public are going to respond as thinking, sensible people to get the right answer. But that's not to say that radiation isn't dangerous. It can, of course, be deadly, and at Chernobyl in particular, the workers, the firefighters who went in after the explosion and put the fire out suffered very large radiation doses indeed, and this is a plot of their mortality as a function of the dose that they received along the bottom. And those who received more than 4,000 millisieverts, a large fraction of those died within a few weeks of acute radiation syndrome, which is essentially when far beyond anything that can be done can be repaired, the biological cell mechanisms simply close down and the cell cycle is suspended and the person eventually dies. And that happens within a few weeks. So as far as Fukushima would have happened, it would have happened already. But below 4,000, certainly below 2,000, nobody died, although there were quite a number of such people. So after 6 weeks at Fukushima, it was reported that 30 workers had received between 100 and 250 millisieverts, including those who, in fact, had gone into the water that had, very radioactive water that had flooded the basement of one of the reactors. And so these people had significant doses, but nothing anywhere near 2,000 millisieverts. And so, well, it's not a prediction anymore. None of them are expected to die of acute radiation syndrome. If they were, they'd have gone already. It is surprising to learn, and you can find all this sort of thing out now thanks to the web. You can go and look at the website of the Royal College of Radiologists and see what radiation doses are recommended for various types of cancer for people having radiotherapy. And you find that the radiation doses that people get when they have radiotherapy is very, very much higher than this 4,000 millisieverts, which we found was the threshold of whole-scale fatalities at Chernobyl. And in fact, what happens, the unpleasant part of radiotherapy, of course, is you have to go there again and again and again, day after day after day, for 6 weeks or so. And what happens is that every day, the tumor gets about 2,000 millisieverts, and over the period of the treatment, that's good enough to kill it. Well, that's fine, because that's what is intended. But the surrounding tissue gets about 1,000 millisieverts per day, and so that's about 20,000 millisieverts per month, and that tissue needs to survive if the radiotherapy treatment is going to be successful and the patient is going to have any quality of life subsequently. There's a lot of work going on this sort of thing, as some of you may know, to improve this. But at the moment, radiotherapy is in something of a disgrace in its ability to deliver the radiation dose to the tumor and not to the surrounding peripheral tissue. This is a section through the lower abdomen. There's a contour around the end, which is sort of the skin. But this is a contour map of the radiation dose of somebody who's having radiotherapy for prostate, and you can see there's a high contour in the middle there, which is 97% of the maximum, and the shaded region there is the rectum, which is a very radiosensitive organ, which has got to work if people are going to have a decent quality of life afterwards. And the scary thing is to find that the contour for 50% of dose density is that heavy line, which is going out almost to covering a large part of the lower abdomen. You can see from the outer contour that the radiation has been shone in different directions in an attempt to maximize the overlap. But X-rays cannot be focused, they cannot be stopped at the right place in depth, and its radiotherapy is not very good, except that it works. So in spite of the fact that we get 50% in tissue which has to survive, and therefore 1,000 millisieverts per day, 20,000 per month, tissue survives that. And it survives that because every day the healthy tissue is just able to get enough time and resources to mend enough of the DNA and mend enough of the cells and so on to be able to face the next day's treatment, whereas the tumor cells, with just a bit more treatment, are not able to do so. If it were not for this kind of repair mechanisms, radiotherapy wouldn't work. It's quite interesting. If you go onto the website of the Royal College of Radiologists, they explain how when X-rays first came along and the X-ray machines weren't able to deliver doses enough to do the whole thing at once. So you had to go back every day and having a little bit of a time for purely instrumental reasons. And that worked. But then as the radiation sources got better, they said, oh, good, Joe, we can do it all at once. And the patients died. Either that they didn't get enough, and so that the tumor didn't die, or they got a bit too much, and the peripheral tissue died. And so they had to go back to spreading the radiation dose out, which is what is called fractionation in the clinical jargon. So what happened? Let's look at evacuation at Fukushima. Well, in fact, it was determined by drawing circles on the map, but the sort of guidance was 20 millisieverts per year. That's the sort of figure which is considered dangerous. That's compared with 20,000 millisieverts per month, which our radiotherapy treatment patient has received. So that's like 1,000 years at the evacuation criterion, essentially all in a month. This is unreasonable. You've got to be a little bit careful because the radiotherapy treatment is not over the whole body at once. It's only over, but it's over quite a large area, and the whole body dose of 20 millisieverts per year is for the whole body. But that doesn't absorb many factors of 10, and we've got a lot of factors of 10 adrift there. So some people say, oh, but radiotherapy is something which is a traumatic choice for the individual in discussion with the doctor and so on. And that's quite different from something in the community. Oh, no, it isn't. The effect on people of the community in the community is as dangerous and as lethal potentially as the radiotherapy dose. And we saw that in talking to the doctors and people when we visited Fukushima. So radiation safety at the expense of everything else, which is the way it's been handled up to now, including the mental health and the community well-being and so on, is simply not justified. Now, unfortunately, again, what happened at Chernobyl? On the 28th of February 2011, that's just a few days before the Fukushima accident, there was a UN, an UNSCEAR report came out which emphasized that the widespread damage from the radiation, from fear of radiation, telling people that they were sufferers from radiation, that they've all got to move out of their houses, that they've got to abandon their homes and their businesses and so on. The effects of this were far more serious than the effect due to the radiation itself. and the IAEA report of 2006 said the same thing. Unfortunately, it seems that these lessons haven't been learnt, and the whole problem has been repeated again at Fukushima. I haven't said anything about radiation-induced cancer yet. These repair mechanisms are incredibly ingenious. Biology is really beautiful for somebody who's not a biologist and coming in and reading about it. They're amazing, but they don't always work. And in particular, the immune system, which is the final protection that cells are not growing that shouldn't be there, the immune system, of course, fails, particularly in later years, and most of people who get cancer in old age, not when they're young. So to see the effect of radiation-induced cancer, have to follow people's health over the whole of their lives. And the effect is actually remarkably small. And so in order to get statistics, you have to look at a very large number of people, because the number of people who will get cancer anyway has got to be subtracted. You're looking at a quite small difference. And to get a very large number of people, some of whom have been irradiated, some who haven't, and looked at over a long period, there aren't many such data sets of that kind, and the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who've been followed now for over 50 years, is the best example of that. The average dose is 160 millisieverts, which is essentially at the top end of what the workers at Fukushima have been getting, for example. And for the overall, the average cancer risk increased by 1 in 15, but you can't tell, of course, the cancers that are due to radiation from the cancers that are due to smoking or other oxidative processes, because the biology is essentially all the same once the initial radiation has deposited its energy and caused the molecular chaos. All the rest of it and the evolution and things that happen after that are the same for any attack on the cells. So it's got to be looked at statistically, and this is all published stuff. It's been possible, incidentally, to measure the radiation dose. It can be done in 3 different ways. Radiation dose of individual survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then ask the question whether their cancer rates or extra cancer rates are correlated with their dose and so on. I'll show you that in a minute. So a third, the red and the orange sectors, wedges, are those inhabitants who were killed by blast, fire, early radiation effects, and so on, and they're lost. What we're looking at is what happened to the people who survived until 1950, since when their health records have been kept and their radiation doses recorded. And the yellow sector shows the number who died of cancer between 1950 and 2000, and then by comparing with the death rates, similar death rates from other Japanese cities who are not so irradiated, you can look at how much extra was due to radiation. And the answer is, just as I say, 1/15 of that yellow sector, which is actually only 0.44%. Just to put things in perspective, the chance of dying on the roads in 50 years in the US is about 0.6%. So it's slightly less than that. But I don't find that particularly convincing. What is more convincing is looking, as I say, as to what happened to people in different bands of radiation dose. And those who got, bottom but one, above 2,000 millisieverts, that band had an excess cancer rate of between 7.2 and 10.8%. Those are per thousand. 7.2 and 10.8%. So they have a very strong extra cancer rate, about double. But when you go down and you look at the lowest bands of radiation dose, below 100 millisieverts, marked there in green, then the extra risk per thousand inhabitants is below there, about 3.5. Those are the one standard deviation statistical range. So it's not possible to measure. But if it's not possible to measure something when the population of two major cities have been bombed with two nuclear bombs and their health followed by 50 years, it's not going to be possible to measure it anywhere else either, it is suggested. So the green, anything below 100 millisieverts looks pretty safe from the point of view of radiation-induced cancer. I haven't included leukemia on here. There's another slide, but I'll have to skip over that. So what's gone wrong? I'm saying that the regulations are stupid. Well, people are not incompetent. The ICRP, the IAEA, and all the Japanese government and so on have actually been doing a good job. What has gone wrong? Well, all national regulations, including those in Japan and here, are based on the advice that comes from this international committee. And that advice is to essentially ignores other risks and advises to keep radiation as low as reasonably achievable, ALARA. That is, stay close to natural levels. Why does it say that? Well, it's not a safety level. It was for social and political reasons, because if you, those of you who were around in those days, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, people marched and voted and sat in and so on and saying, take radiation away, we do not want any radiation in our lives, and many states said and still say, we are a nuclear-free zone, etc., etc. So people have insisted that regulations and safety laws and working practices and so on reduce radiation as low as reasonably achievable, as low as you can possibly get, which is just a bit above what comes from space and rocks and from radioactivity in our own bodies. And so the fact that that happened was our mistake in the sense that that's what we told ICRP to go away and do. And that's what we told our politicians to support, and that such regulations should go through the government processes. So what should it have said? What we actually need to do is to tell the public what is beginning to be dangerous. Now, in fact, they know what's beginning to be dangerous because they, if you have radiotherapy, that is really right on. That's getting very dangerous indeed. It's right on the edge of being dangerous, and a bit too far into it, in fact. So what we really need is levels which are as high as relatively safe. This is that's my suggestion, where relatively means taking into account competing risks, so that if it's a matter of turfing people out of their homes, then you have a high, you tolerate a pretty high dose. If it's a matter of radiologists working in hospitals or something, it doesn't cost the cost and inconvenience and so on of putting up a few more layers of lead and so on to look after them doesn't cost a lot, and you probably want to take, you probably do want to be slightly more conservative. So relatively, depending on what So the important thing, which is ignored by the ICRP at the moment, is that account should be taken of the fact that given some time, even a day, but let's certainly say a month, that human tissue, and you can do experiments with mice and rats and so on, recovers from the effects of radiation. Okay, so we know the kind of thing we've got to do. How are we going to do it? How are we going to tell the politicians and the public, even when we've got the numbers? Well, this isn't the first time this sort of thing has happened. Florence Nightingale, who I thought went to Crimea and walked around the wards with lamps and things and got cheered when she got back to London. She was actually a rather distinguished statistician of her day. And she was I think she was one of the founder members of the British Statistical Society. And she collected information on the reasons why the soldiers were dying in Crimea, when they were dying, and what they were dying of. And then, she went back to London, and she drew diagrams that even politicians could understand. And with the internet these days, of course, you can go and actually find the originals of the diagrams that she drew. Well, I won't go into them all, but these are time diagrams showing what the soldiers were dying of, and she managed to get the politicians of the day to take this on board, and the public, and so on, and she succeeded. So what we need to do is to explain to the general public and the politicians, who can't be even more stupid than they were in the 1850s, how can we do it? Well, let's suppose that we represent monthly doses shown by an area. And then the big rectangle there is something like 40,000 millisieverts per month. It's actually much more than that, but that's the figure I've been talking about. And that represents death to a cell. So that's not safe for anything. However, half that, like 20,000 millisieverts per month, is tolerated when it's spread out within the month, as we have seen, and all of us, almost all of us, have friends or relatives, or if we haven't personally had it, have seen evidence of toleration of such dosage. We don't have to persuade people to look in the literature or anything. That is common experience. The ICRP public ALARA level, which is 1 millisievert per year, or give or take a 20%, 0.1 millisieverts per month, is the same area as that little dot. So I'm talking about the fact that that amber rectangle is not compatible with that little dot. And I'm suggesting that conservatively, a sensible figure will be 100 millisieverts per month. That's conservative by a factor of 200 compared with what the radiotherapy patient gets, but that does include some allowance of 5 or something for the difference between a local and a whole body dose. The difference between a local and a whole body dose doesn't help the tumor much. It dies. It's affected by the local dose. So it's no good to say that you can just average things over the whole body. That's just not true. So that's my little green. That little green square is my suggestion. That's 50 times larger than the current evacuation level, which is 2 millisieverts per month. And so, by such graphical means or otherwise, something like safety levels which represented 100 millisieverts maximum in a single dose Well, we know from Hiroshima and Nagasaki that that is quite sensible. 100 millisieverts per month in a maximum in any month. And then there's always the question that there may be an effect which does, in spite of everything that I say, integrate up and slowly get worse over a lifetime. So we have to go back, and I haven't got time to show you that, but there's other data with which you can say what lifetime dose could we expect to tolerate without damage. And it'd be something like 5,000 millisieverts maximum. That's already a small fraction of what the radiotherapy patient gets in 1 month. So, well, if you take, into the middle of this slide, if you take the Hiroshima and Nagasaki data and you look at how many of those 30 workers at Fukushima who've had a reasonably sized dose, how many of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors suffered cancer in the next 50 years? And the answer was, died of it, and the answer was 1 in 150. But there's 1 in 150 of 30 is less than 1. So the chance of anybody dying of it's unlikely that anybody will die of cancer in the next 50 years as a result of Fukushima. There is, of course, the special thing of thyroid cancer, which was known about before Chernobyl, but it was particularly bad at Chernobyl because Chernobyl is in an iodine-deficient region. So the children had very low iodine in their thyroid, and when they got the radioactive iodine into their bodies, it was quickly assimilated, and the worst happened. Well, the worst happened, in fact, was that 6,000 children contracted thyroid cancer, but it's not fatal. About 15 of those have died so far. A few more of those will die, but it's already 25 years ago, so not an enormous amount more. But in Fukushima, as I went there, I said to people, do you feed seaweed? I know you eat seaweed yourself, which of course got lots of iodine in it. Do you feed iodine to your children, seaweed to your children? And the answer was yes. So, and they handed out iodine tablets. So the likelihood that there will be any thyroid cancers from Fukushima is small, but it's a bit difficult to be quantitative about that. Well, some conclusions. One of the big conclusions, I think I've covered most things here, one of the big conclusions is that there's a massive educational job to do. Not only have we got scientifically to inform ourselves, but we've then got to educate people to whom radiation is just a word that they're frightened of, and they have actually no knowledge to go with it whatsoever. And I can tell you that when I talk in pubs and clubs and so on, people just want to know. There isn't a problem. They're genuinely curious to find out what nobody has ever told them. So, I don't think we should ever have thought that radiation was exceptionally dangerous. It's certainly got an extraordinarily clean track record. And I think we've got to move very quickly to exploit nuclear radiation or nuclear technology to deal with climate change. And we've got a big PR problem on our hands. And now here comes the commercial. I've bought some copies of my book, which you're welcome to come and buy. There are lots of things on the website. This book, of course, was published in 2009, which is before Fukushima. But actually, the story hasn't changed. But there is an epilogue on Fukushima, which is which you can download from the website, but it's also incorporated into the Japanese edition. And I think that's all. Thank you.